temporary challenges and issues that matter to us. This year we have scheduled a whole series you see on the flyers that are on the seats. We have a program each month, one in October, that's tonight, then November, December, January, February, with the next one actually being 2 weeks from tonight that you're all invited to. And the format this year is a little bit different than previous years, and it's exciting because of her husband. Avram feels a need to tell this, Hashem feels a need to share the conversation with Abraham for whatever reason. And when Hashem shares this with Abraham, he gives the reason for Sarah's laughter and disbelief, not because Abraham was old, but rather because Sarah was old. And Rashi comments here a beautiful idea that you see from here that Hashem was concerned about the feelings of Abraham. And this is one source where Hashem, the Torah, Halacha, the rabbis, are concerned about the human condition, about psychology, and about people's feelings. Okay, so we have a great privilege tonight to have two highly respected expert psychologists, one from the holy city of Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, and one from the holier city of Yerushalayim. I always tell people Los Angeles, Beverly Hills is a wonderful place to live outside of Israel. The best place is Israel, and of course her areas of specialty include parenting, couples counseling, and individual therapy to help people develop more inner resources and live better lives. And we know what a fantastic person Chana is. We have a great panel tonight. We wish Mazel Tov to Chana and to her family. Chana became an aunt once again today. Her sister had a baby girl. Without further ado, thank you all for being here. Pleasure to introduce Dr. Aiken and Dr. Gelb, and for Chana to take it away.
Thank you, Rabbi Top. It's so good to see everyone here. I'm not nervous because you guys are all our friends and a community, and it's going to be great to have a conversation about so many of these important things that are on our minds. I want to start with asking Dr. Aiken. First of all, welcome to LA. Hope you're enjoying LA and the weather and the people. Dr. Aiken, you've worked with so many different populations. When I spoke to you, you said you worked with post-Vietnam population in New York. You've worked with people on the Upper West Side, in Boston, Satmar women, and now you're working with Haredi children in Israel, just to name a few in your practice. And something that crossed my mind is, do you see similarities in the population?
What is pathological? This generation isn't pathological. The next generation, then something else is pathological. Then it's not pathological. Then it's desirable. You know, psychology has so many whims according to who's leading it at the time. If they're from California, then we know it's going to be different than New York. If it's New York, we know it's going to be different than New York. We know it's going to be different than Israel. There's no moral compass in psychology. I remember when any marital therapist that I knew, or not marital therapist, every individual therapist that I knew, if somebody had a bad marriage, they'd say, get out, you've got to make yourself happy.
That was in the 80s.
That was in the 70s, that was in the 80s. Yeah. And now it's all changed around again. So now there's the idea of responsibility to a family, responsibility for this and that. So Judaism has a set compass for us that I think is so healthy for us to follow. But a lot of times we get stuck with our psychological issues. Rabbi Soloveitchik once said that the purpose of psychotherapy is to give people back their bechira chafshit, their free choice, their free will. So if someone is so unable to be themselves the way they were meant to be, is so unable to be in a healthy relationship, unable to work in a healthy way, actualize goals and things like that, psychology can do a great deal to free us up, to make those free choices, to live up to the potential that we each have.
I love that. Everyone knows there's a joke around that says that, you know, they think the truth will set you free. That's what the Freudians used to say. The truth will set you free. You realize it in psychology, you go to therapy, and everyone knows that that's not really true. That's only half the story, right? The truth will set you free, and then we need good tools to figure out how to follow through and how to get to where we want to get, how to get to the promised land, how to get to the goals that we set. So I think that the Bechira Chafshi part, the free choice part, is a really lovely idea. Going back to what you asked me, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a fast-paced world it is in general, not specifically about technology. I think that we live in such a fast-paced world It's amazing how many people are out at 7:30 at night because we have so many other obligations. There's so much more that's wanted of our time nowadays. We have so many different roles, and we're always toggling between all these different roles. I don't really think everyone talks about that since smartphones, everything's changed. I don't quite think it's true. I think it's since we're modern people, so much more is demanded of us, so much more is asked of us in different ways. And the question is, how can we be fully present? How can we stay present and focused in this modern world? And I think halacha tells us a lot about this. I think halacha is very transition-oriented. I think we have a really interesting idea that we can take from halacha into our regular lives. It's so fast-paced, but halacha really tells us about preparation. We have Erev Shabbos to get ready for Shabbat. We have this concept of Erev Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, to get ready for Yom Kippur. We have this idea of preparation. We have this idea of let's slow down, let's get ready. And it's built into the halacha. We have this idea you can't just eat and run, right? What's the phrase? I'm eating and running. You can't eat and run. You eat and then you have to bench. You eat and then you have to stop. You have to pause. There's this idea of preparation that I think is all over. Oliver Sacks, who was a neurologist, a very famous neurologist, he's written many books. He has a beautiful piece. He grew up in London, and he writes about his mother, who was a surgeon. It's a beautiful article. He writes about his mother, who was a surgeon, who used to prepare gefilte fish on Friday. She'd come home, she'd take off her surgical gloves, he describes in great detail, and make gefilte fish. And he describes it in this beautiful detail. And he was no longer observant, and he wrote about how he would find someone who, he found a housekeeper who was able to make the gefilte fish, and they would go buy the carp from the Bronx every Friday and make gefilte fish like his mother. And I found it so touching that he talks about, he didn't talk about his memories of Shabbos as much as his memories of the preparation for Shabbos. And that's what made Shabbos special. So I think we need to think about when we multitask and when we are transitioning in times, either going from work to home to work, being a parent, being a spouse, being a child, how can we prepare for our different tasks? Can we take a moment and say, hey, I need to mentally prepare. Can we take the lesson of halacha? Can we take the lesson of an Erev Shabbos, of an Erev Yom Kippur, even Avelut, when there's mourning? We don't just say, okay, I'm back to life. There's this idea of transition. There's this idea that you can't just jump in. And I think that's true for life in our many fast-paced roles, that we can't just jump so easily. So if we can take a minute to think about, what does that mean to prepare? Does that mean that you come home and you listen to a song in the car before you get out of the car so that you'll be more mentally prepared for your family? Does it mean that you change clothes when you come home from work just so that you can mentally shift? What is it that we can prepare so that we can actually be more present in our lives? I think that so many things pass us by. It's such a fast-paced world. How can we make the most of our time on this earth? How can we be fully present? I think it's a little more preparation. It's a little bit more being not present in the moment, not mindful, preparing. I think we really need to think about things and prepare. And I think that Shabbos really represents where we don't have to multitask, which is such a great thing. But if we take the idea of preparation from halacha, I think that will help us slow down and get out of the busyness of our life. So I think if we had more time, I would read to you the quote from Oliver Sacks, but it's worth looking up. It was in the New Yorker not too long ago, but he passed away. But it was a really beautiful piece of how those memories of preparation stayed with him. I wanted to ask you a question, because I read this in one of your books once, about Jewish guilt. We've been talking about some nice things up till now, about having being mindful, being present. All of us carry around some guilt. Most of it is not necessary, is not helpful. How do you think Judaism helps us cope with guilt? What's the Jewish perspective on guilt? What's the psychotherapeutic perspective on guilt?
So Rabbi Noach Weinberg's itself from Aisha Torah, I heard him say this a number of times. We're not Catholic. We don't believe in holding on to guilt. The purpose of guilt is to get us to refrain from doing bad behaviors in the first place. Once we've done them, the purpose is to motivate us to do teshuvah. we have a system for clearing guilt out of our system. It's interesting, the 12-step programs basically adopted the same ideas that Judaism has about how to do teshuvah. You have to do an inventory, you have to make amends. You know, we have one way of doing it with God, we confess, we do vidoy. If it's with another human being, we have to apologize, we have to take care of any financial damage that we might have caused them and whatever. But there's a system that we repair what we've broken. And I think the idea in Judaism that if you break it, you're responsible for it, is a very important idea. So if Rabbi Nachman used to say, if you can break it, you can fix it. And, you know, to take that a step further, I remember just such a sad story, which I'll tell you in a minute, that illustrates that there's so many times when we feel guilty about things because we can't really say, you know what, I'm not in control. I'm not in control. God's in control of the world. He runs the world, and there are things here that are beyond my control, and I may not like them, and I may not understand them, but at the end of the day, He's running the show, and it's not me, and He's going to make things happen that are not up to me. So the story I was going to tell you is there was a man who, he noticed his son loved to fly, and for his 17th birthday, he gave him the best birthday present. There was a small plane company or something like that where there were pilots who would take people around the Hudson and over New York around sunset time. And they would come back into the airport over Kennedy Airport, and they would have like an hour-long ride over the city with all the beautiful lights coming out with the beautiful sunset over the Atlantic Ocean. Well, the man and his son and the pilot went up, and the plane's motors stopped, and the plane came crashing down into the Atlantic. And the son went under, and the father dove in the icy, dark waters for half an hour to try to find his son and retrieve him, and he failed. And he couldn't forgive himself. In his mind, he had caused his son's death. So from a Jewish perspective, from a human perspective, we can all relate to that story because it's so tragic, it's so sad. On the other hand, from a Jewish point of view, we can understand that it wasn't his fault, that there are things in life that happen that are beyond our control, and we can have wonderful intentions and do something that is in no way wrong, but the consequences can be very tragic. And so one of the things that Judaism can help us to do is to get the mindset that we have to come to terms with our own limitations, that we sometimes have to ask ourselves, have I done anything wrong objectively? Was it my fault that the son died? It wasn't your fault. You had no way of knowing. You had the best information you had at the time to make the decision that you made. To segue into EMDR, it's fascinating that, you know, we feel guilty about so many things, but on a certain level we have to realize that we are not responsible. And one of the things that is part and parcel of EMDR is helping us to recreate appropriate memories, which sometimes we're very good at just taking pieces from. There's a story that we were told about an army soldier under fire, and he was with his unit, and somebody in the unit got shot and was very badly injured. And this man also got shot in his leg, and he crawled on his hands to dragging this soldier along with him, and the soldier bled to death. The one who was trying to save him was told by his commanding officer, it's your fault he died. And through EMDR, he was able to see the real memory of what had happened and all the heroics that this man had done to try to save the life of this other soldier. And through this psychological mechanism, he was able to see that he indeed really wasn't responsible. So I think from both ends, Judaism helps us to see what we really can control, what we really can't control, and appreciate that we have limitations. And psychology can help us to let go of those things that we have these irrational beliefs about, and put us in a framework to see what the objective reality is, and to let go of things that we really should not be feeling responsible for.
So you're focusing a little bit on the difference between rational and irrational. We need to use our minds sometimes, and we need to not just let our feelings go, but using rational thought can really help us reframe.
I think it's more than that, that the therapists themselves have to sometimes teach somebody what's rational and what's not rational. You know, I don't know how many of you experience this, thank God I never did, but there's, you know, all the food. You know how many children are starving in China? Well, the smart aleck response to that is, and if I eat my chicken soup, less children are going to be starving in China. So people are sometimes taught from childhood to relate things that aren't related, to connect things that aren't connected. And sometimes it takes a therapist to be able to sort out for somebody that it's not your fault that your parent is unhappy. It's not your fault that your parents got divorced. It's not your fault that fill in the blank. And psychology can make life a different experience for people by helping them to sort through what's really true and what's not so true. You know, as we talk about what therapy does, what Judaism does, I think it raises the topic of, there's a famous light bulb joke, you know, how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. Okay. So, you know, I think for you, Chana, the question is, how much can people really change? You know, we may say that I want to accept me just the way I am. We know that kids are born with a certain temperament. You know, how much really is change possible with people? When somebody comes to you and they have a terrible background, you know, do you say, well, this person can be anything they want, or do you have an idea of how far the limits are?
I think that's a really good point, that we have to acknowledge our predispositions. We have to say, I come from this background, but what can I become? I think if we don't dream, I think that if we accept our status quo, we become cynical and we don't believe in change, then why live? You know, that's not life. That's not the life we're put on this earth to be. We have to believe, not in a Pollyanna way, not in a idealistic, oh, I just graduated high school, I can do it. Guys, you can do anything after high school. I mean, it's a good thing to think post high school, but we have to believe in change. It's a very important concept. We talk about it a lot around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but it's peppered through all of our philosophy, ideology, and in psychology, that we do believe in change. We don't resign ourselves to the status quo. We don't stop dreaming ever. And but we do have to acknowledge that change is difficult, that it's not an easy thing to do, but we have to believe in change. I think that Maimonides, the Rambam's definition of change, is being in the same situation and responding differently. So for some people it could be, okay, my mother did this, I'm not going to react in a certain way. For some it could be, my friend did this, but I'm going to react differently. And for some it could be, I failed, but I'm not going to give up. Can we say that we're in the same situation and react differently? Can we not get disappointed in our children when they throw the Legos out even after you ask them not to? Can we not get disappointed in our friends, even though we may feel disappointed? So the question is, can we change? I think the first thing to say is the Atlantic magazine published a really interesting study. They asked people to sit quietly between 6 and 15 minutes, and they were wired that they could shock themselves at the same time. How many people, do you think anyone would choose to shock themselves? By a raise of hands. People could not sit by themselves quietly. A third of the women, 2/3 of the men shocked themselves. They could not sit quietly. I think the beginning of change has to be, who are we? Can we be honest about our flaws? And equally strong, can we be honest about our strengths? Can we be honest about what we're good at? But we have to first be able to sit with ourselves. And that's something that is really, really hard to do. I think that there was a really interesting study by Walter Mischel, the famous Marshmallow study. Are you familiar with the Marshmallow study? It's a famous study. He was a psychologist at Stanford, and he did a study on kids about delayed gratification, and said if you can have one marshmallow now, but if you wait a few minutes, you can have 2 or 3. And if you didn't like marshmallows, it would be jelly beans, and if it wasn't jelly beans, it could be chocolate. It was whatever you liked. And he wanted to see what could delay gratification. What's really interesting about the story is that Walter Mischel was also a smoker, but he couldn't quit smoking. He had a really, really hard time quitting smoking. And he couldn't figure out why it was so hard to do. After all, he did this study on delayed gratification. It should be easy to stop smoking. And what he realized is what stopped him finally from smoking is he was at Stanford in the medical school. He walked in and he saw a CT scan of a man who had lung cancer. And he visualized his lungs with tumors. And that's what stopped him. So I think that there's sometimes a motivation that's negative. Sometimes we'll say, oh my God, what have I become? Who am I becoming? Something negative that can stop us. It can be fear. It can be fear of a punishment, something negative. But equally true and equally possible is something positive. Maybe we can say, what can I be? Maybe there's an image of us, visualization of it in a positive way. Just like Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rav Kook talk about tshuva. Rav Kook talks about going back to our inner source, and Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about this idea of recreating ourselves. I think this idea of visualization is really powerful when we think about tshuva. Sometimes it'll be, oh my God, what am I becoming? And that's what stopped Walter Mischel from smoking. Sometimes it's going to be something very positive, like, can I dream? Can I be that person that I thought I could be? Can I be that person that my parents told me I could be? Can I be that person that my teacher believed in that I could be? But can I be what I want to be? Can I dream and can I have a vision? So I think having a motivation is the first step for change. I think that's a really important piece. And then there's so many different tools, and we have to use the tools that work. The same way that there are 25,000 diet books, literally, because not one diet works for all people. There's so many different tools that will work to help us. It could be having a friend cheerleading you. It could be more psychodynamic, going to our past, understanding, hey, my mom was never home. It's hard for me to be present for my children. Or it could be, you know what, I'm just going to change my habit. I realize that I get up at 4 o'clock every day, I have a cookie. I'm going to change that habit because I understand why. There's so many different tools. You can do more dynamic tools, you can do more cognitive behavioral tools. But I think that what's important is to know that there are tools out there to change, and that there's not one size fits all. The Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva really blends both. He says that there are 4 steps to Tshuva. What are they? They're Azivat HaChet, leaving the sin. So that's behavior. There's Charata, regret, which involves insight. And then Vidui, which is confession to God, also insight. And then acceptance that you're not going to do it in the future. So the Rambam's idea really does blend behavior and insight. And I think we have to know that the motivation is the biggest thing. What's going to motivate us? What's going to jolt us out of our status quo, either in relationships or in our own abilities? What's going to jolt us? What's going to be that aha moment that's going to say, hey, not just I can do better, not just I can be a better mom at 4 o'clock when my kids come home and not yell, but can I be a better person? It's not just about the behaviors. It's about, we can look at behaviors, and there's 64,000 books about self-help, how to be a better mother at 4 o'clock, how to diet at 7 a.m. There's so many books, and it's all specialized behaviors. But I think the bigger question is to ask, how can we be better people? Can we dream that we can actually do more in this world, be better people, be more in this world, be better friends, be better people? So I think that the motivation and to visualize, I think psychotherapy really adds that piece of visualization. Either to the negative, like seeing those spots on that CT scan got Walter Mischel to stop. Nothing got him to stop smoking, even the Surgeon General warning, until he could visualize it. And when we visualize and have a vision for ourselves, sometimes it's we have to borrow the vision from a therapist, from a rabbi, from a mentor, from a friend, from a parent. We can visualize a vision of ourselves. That's when I think change can start happening. And then we have to know that we're going to toggle, we're going to fail, we're going to slip, we're going to have good days, we're going to have bad days, but as long as we hold the vision, there's hope that we can always get there a little bit closer. And that we have to know that not to give up, not to give up when there's incremental change, to be patient.
Chana, you had asked me earlier about different groups that I've worked with, so I just wanted to put that together with what you're saying now. I only had ever met one Satmar woman in my life, and I was working with her daughter for a short while, and that was my extent of ever having any relationship with anybody from that specific community. And one of the things I noticed when I came to Israel, and I was working almost exclusively with Baalei Teshuvah, is they would change more in 3 months than most of my patients in Manhattan would change in 3 years. And when I started working with the Satmar women, they changed even faster. And I started to ask myself, like, what is it about these women that are from such an incredibly traditional society that if I say, this is your homework for next week, they would go ahead and they would do it. So then the we say here where the asimon fell, the light bulb went off. And I began to realize there's something that we may not accept in our private lives, which is that they have a Rebbe. They have an authority figure. They have this constant father figure in their lives, and they trust authority. When I was raised, we were raised never to trust authority. There was a slogan when I was a kid, I don't know if anybody's as old as I am in the room, don't trust authority, never trust authority.
Question authority.
So as soon as the rabbi, the Rebbe, gives me his hechsher, that I am a medical or a psychological authority, then he confers on me the ability to tell people what to do and to have them listen to me.
Did it stick?
It was unbelievable.
Do you find like it stuck?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because what happens is,
Don't you wish we all had Rebbe's, guys? Like it would be so simple.
if somebody does something that works and they get really good results, they want to do it again and again. And so in a very short period of time, if people are doing those things that get them good results, what's to stop them from doing more of it? And then as they do more and it becomes their second nature, their automatic response to do things that work well, so then it becomes incorporated into their personality. So I think in Israel, the environment of coming to Yerushalayim to learn in a seminary or to learn in a yeshiva was already working with people who had a framework of, I am here to change, I am here to grow. You know, in America, very often people become with the mindset, I am who I am, people have to accept me for who I am. I once got to a point with a certain patient where after 3 months of him telling me what was wrong with his boss, what was wrong with his wife, what was wrong with his son, what was wrong with his friend, you name it. I said, listen, Ted, we're going to rent out Yankee Stadium one night, and we're going to fill it with the 60,000 people in your life that aren't okay, and I'll fix them all at once. He got it. And after that, he finally realized that the only thing that we can control is us. We can't force anybody else to do what we want them to do. We can't force anybody else to change. As it says in the Talmudic story, Hakolbi, it's all up to me. And I think that message in Judaism, that it's all up to me. I can't change the family that I came from. I can't change the sex I was born into. I can't change, well, nowadays we can, I won't get into that. You know, I can't change so many things of the genes that I have, but I can change the choices that I make so that I live a different life and I can formulate goals and I can make steps to reach those goals. And if I put out all the right efforts, I still don't make it, well, that part's up to God. But all of those choices along the way are in my hands. And I think the idea of coming to a yeshiva where people have the foundation of life is about change. You can change. We can all do teshuvah. We can all grow. We can all do this or that is an incredibly empowering message that I think most people don't get over here. And I think that because of that, the change came much, much faster and did last much, much longer.
It's refreshing to remember that idea about Israel and about a certain stage of life where people really are focused on change. And I think that we forget when we're so busy that we too can change. I like a line that sometimes I tell my patients, agency is not an option, it's a responsibility. We all have agency. We all have a way to make something better. Things are in our control. And not Pollyanna, it doesn't take away from the complexity of life or the complexity of our relationships or the pain or the suffering. That can be very real. But there is some agency at the same time to balance the fact that there is pain and there is fear and there is suffering and there's anger and disappointments. But to balance that with agency, that we do have agency. Agency is not an option, it's a responsibility. To take that away and to know that some of our external problems, to fix them, we have to look inside. We have to look inside, we have to say, what can we do differently? So I think that's a really important piece. I love that it's so refreshing to hear that context from Israel. I wanted to ask you a question. We're talking about relationships that we can't change other people around us, and we might be in things that are frustrating. What are your recommendations, and what are your thoughts about how psychology looks at when anger gets in the way in a relationship? In a very practical way, how do we deal with anger in relationships?
First of all, I want to tell you the Jewish perspective, and then I'm going to tell you the psychological tools, because helping Sicilian American men deal with their anger was one of the most important things I learned during my internship 40 years ago. But as far as Judaism goes, the Talmud says that a person who gets angry is like a person who worships idols. It took me many, many years to understand that idea. And the idea comes down to expectations. I used to get furious when I would go to the post office, and there would be a line. I'd have to stand there for 20 minutes. Me? I have to stand there for 20 minutes? This isn't the way life should be. Or very frequently, I would go into the supermarket and I would have like 2.5 minutes to get back to my office, and I would get the trainee. Or I would get the person whose the tape just ran out. They had to finish, the roll, and they'd have to put a new one in. They'd have to get a supervisor. After a while, I realized God was telling me, you've got to change. But the idea behind it is, what did I have to change? I had to change my expectations. That the world doesn't run according to me. I have to adapt to the way the world really runs. And whether it's the cashier, or it's the supermarket, or it's my coworker, or it's my child, or it's my spouse, I have to learn expectations are according to who you're dealing with, not according to the ideal world. So I'll never forget, I was giving a talk about communication one night on the Upper East Side, and a woman said to me, how can I not be angry at my son? I said, well, what happened? She said, well, I knew you were speaking tonight at 7:30, and that meant I had to leave my house at 7 o'clock. And I told him at 6:45 he had to get into bed. I said, how old is your son? She said, he's 4. I was stunned. She thinks that a 4-year-old's like a robot. You tell him to wash his face, you tell him to brush his teeth, you tell him to get into bed, and of course he listens to everything you say. Don't we all know that at the age of 4, every child does exactly what the parents want? So, understanding what are normal expectations, what are reasonable expectations for a person's given situation can be a task of a therapist. Very often people don't know what normal expectations are. They don't know that it's okay for them to do this or to feel this or to act this way. They don't know that it's not okay. Gee, my father always beat us, so why shouldn't I beat my kids? So the therapist can help people to set reasonable expectations. In addition to which, we had a whole system which I thought was so incredibly elegant that I've been using for the last 40 years with tremendous success with people who get angry. So a typical example during my internship would be a guy who was a vet who would hit his girlfriend, or he would hit his son, or he would hit one of my patients. He tried to kill both of his kids, and I mean that literally, because he sent them to bed and they came downstairs later behind his back to get milk and cookies. So had his wife not walked in on them, they would have both been murdered that night. So the first thing we taught them is to recognize feelings. Many people don't even know when they're feeling angry until they're exploding. But anger is something that builds. And so to train people to begin to identify what they're feeling before it's out of control is something very important, and it's something that many people are missing. Second thing is that when people start to feel angry, and they're explosive people, they're not in a position to control themselves at that point. The only thing they can do is walk out of the room. So the first step is you recognize the feeling. The second step is when you feel that way, leave. The third step is, let's see how long it takes between the time you feel you're going to explode and the time that you first started feeling angry. Well, let's say it takes 5 seconds. You have time to say to the person you're with, I have to leave the room. Great. Now you've got a little bit more of a window of time. And then you get to a point where you start to work on communication skills. So before you get to a point of no return, you start to ask the other person, is this what you meant when you said such and such to me? Did you mean to disrespect me? Is there another way of looking at the situation that you can help people to see things from a different angle? I'll tell you a story that happened to me many years ago. My husband was a cardiac anesthesiologist, and typically he would work till at least 10 o'clock at night, sometimes 11 o'clock, and then he would come home even later nights when he was on call, very often midnight till 2 o'clock in the morning. So, not that long after we got married, I realized making him dinner was a ridiculous thing because he would never be home to eat it anyway. So one night he called me, it was a night during the winter, and he said, I should be home, I'm going to go change my clothes now. So from that time until he would get home would be about half an hour to 45 minutes. I said, great, I'll make you dinner. He said, terrific. Okay. So it was like, I figured he'd be home at 8 o'clock, start making a nice dinner. 8 o'clock comes and goes, 8:10, 8:15, 8:20. What do you think I was thinking?
Where is he?
Again. You know, guys, in case you don't know this, women have memories that will remember every single thing you did wrong from the time of your first date. Okay? And we will remember in such detail. We don't remember anything else in our lives, but that we will never forget. So, getting flashbacks of all of these times when I thought he'd be home at 10 or 11, and then there was another emergency surgery, then he showed up at 2 o'clock the next morning or 6 o'clock the next morning. So I was getting upset. And I can even say I was getting annoyed. And finally at 8:30 the phone rang. And I'm ready. I'm just stewing. Why did I bother making dinner again? And again, you're not home. And he said, I'm in the hospital. I said, I figured. He said, no, you don't get it. I was in a car accident. I'm in the emergency room. Notice your reaction when I changed the picture from the assumption that he was just not being careful or something happened and I was once again being left in the lurch to maybe he's going to lose his life. How often do we judge people in situations from our point of view instead of waiting, holding ourselves to see what really happened from the other person's point of view? What's their perspective? Where are they coming from? And so much anger would be not there in the first place if we could do two things. One is to see the world from other people's point of view and change our expectations according to that. And the other is for us to be able to appreciate that there are many sides to a story. And if we set ourselves up with the other side of the story, then a lot of times there's no reason to be angry, because we'll understand that the reasons we were basing our anger didn't exist in the first place.
So you're really saying to make room for our feelings, acknowledge our feelings, but also tune into what else might be going on. Tuning into to anyone else in the world will make room for another perspective, which really is what empathy is about, making room for seeing something from someone else's perspective. I think that was a really good takeaway. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you, when you talk about empathy, we all know how important empathy is. How much can you really help as a therapist, people becoming more empathic? Isn't it something that people like have or they don't have, or is it something that you really can give them tools to develop?
I think that the Torah understands that it's a big, that it's not easy. And that left to our own devices, we wouldn't necessarily be nice. We might not care about the people on the margins of our society. And that's why there's so many mitzvot, there's so many commandments that are aimed at helping and focusing and helping on people who are different than we are. The Rambam says that the definition of someone who fails to mourn or fails to fast is cruel. He calls him achzari. Achzari is cruel. Is that really cruel? And I think what the Rambam is saying is that when we're oblivious to people's needs, when we're oblivious to the world and only can focus on our own selves, that's what cruelty is. Cruelty is not cruel. It's not beating someone. Cruelty is not being sensitive and not caring about another person. So in that way, I think the Torah recognizes that it's actually really hard, that our natures aren't always so good and so easy. The Rambam says, by a show of hands, do you think it's better to give one gift of $100 or 100 gifts of $1? Or make it a bigger gift? But is it better to give a lot of little gifts or to give one big gift? And the Rambam says it's actually better to give a lot of little gifts. Why? Because it makes us into nicer people. It cultivates the act of giving more. So I think the idea that the mitzvot are there to help us become better people is a very real thing. I think also, though, that psychology recognizes that it's not so easy, that our natures really are mixed. The Harvard Business Review published a study saying that we actually empathize less with people who are just like us. So if you were to be just coming off of maternity leave and go ask your supervisor, who, you have two supervisors. One supervisor is just went through maternity leave and is back, and one didn't. If you ask her for reduced hours, if you ask her for a little break, who do you think is going to be the one that says yes? It's not the one who just had maternity leave, because we have a harder time. The supervisor might say, hey, I got through it, you can get through it, or hey, mine wasn't so bad. We forget, and it really is hard to actually really empathize. When we think about what empathy really means, it's not so easy. It's not so easy just to understand that. But it's very possible. And it's very possible to build resilience, and it's very possible to build empathy. And we have to look at it as a muscle that we're building. The same way that we'll exercise and work out, we can build the empathy. I think the mitzvot are there to do it. I think some of the things we've spoken about tonight, about how to think about the other person's perspective, about anger, about communication, about really going inward to understand the other person, I think these are all ways to build empathy. Sheryl Sandberg, in her book Option B, which I think is such a beautiful book, she writes about it after her husband dies unexpectedly and in a tragic way. She says, she calls it Option B because obviously Plan A was to live happily with her husband, and this was Option B. So here she is, how am I going to get through it? And she writes about the empathic things that people did in that year. She writes about the fact that someone didn't call up and say, hey, what can I get you? I'm at the market. They said, hi, I'm at Jeff's. Do you want your burger with onions and pickles or without? It wasn't a general thing. It was a very specific way of acting. And I think these are all things to take away, that we can be empathic. And sometimes I think that in our community, we're really good about the hard times. We're really good about Shiva. We're really good when someone's sick. We're really good when someone's in need. But can we be empathic when times are good? Can we be a community that our values, that we push ourselves and we become connected people, empathic people to each other when times are good, not just when times are bad? In some ways we're very good about the hard stuff, but can we do it in the hard times? I wanted to, I think these are things to think about. I wanted to tell you a story that I thought was beautiful. I'm going to read it because it was in Rabbi Riskin's book. Two short stories, very short stories. Rabbi Riskin writes about, he got a visit from a young woman seeking his counsel. She explained to him her first husband was an IDF soldier who had tragically been killed in combat. She was left with a 3-year-old daughter. Almost 2 years had passed and she recently remarried. Her question was that tomorrow, she said there was going to be an Azkara, a memorial service for her first husband. Would it be inappropriate for her to attend? The issue was obviously very sensitive and complex. Rabbi Riskin explained that the new relationship didn't invalidate her first marriage, and of course, he thought it was appropriate to attend. An hour later, her husband, her current husband, rang the doorbell. And he said, Rabbi Riskin got nervous. He said, uh-oh, maybe I caused a problem between the two. What did I do? The new husband said, he didn't know his wife had just been there. He said, the Azkara for his wife's first husband was tomorrow. Would it be inappropriate if he attended? He wanted to attend to honor the person who had loved his wife so much and who had given birth to this. This is an idea of real empathy. This is an idea that they both cared about each other's feelings so much that they wanted to do it. There are countless stories of learning and hearing about real empathy. And I think the question is, when times aren't hard, what does it mean to be kind, to be tuned in? And I think some of the tools that you've spoken about listening to the other person, realizing that maybe we have our own issues also, not judging, being able to have insight and see what's going on can really lead to greater empathy. I think empathy is when we tune into ourselves and tune into another. It's not just tuning into the other. We have to understand ourselves too. But I think I think, of course, we can grow empathy, but it's not so easy. I don't think our natures are also happy and rosy all the time. You know, they did all the studies post-Holocaust, the Milgram studies were published after the Holocaust to understand how could the Nazis have done what they did? How could it be possible? And Stanley Milgram designed this famous study where he had a person shock someone else. They weren't really getting a shock, but they thought they were shocking them. And to say, well, you're just following orders, and they kept shocking them more and more and more. And Milgram's point was to try to understand how the Nazi guards could have done what they did. And he said, there's this idea, human nature is complicated. Maybe we sometimes follow rules just like this. But this idea that we can understand our natures, but always dream and hope that we can be better. And of course, I think it happens when we have good voices in our head. You can deal with a lot of setbacks. When you're not in a good place, the smallest thing can happen and it can trigger you and tip you off. The question is, how can we be in a good place? Because I think when we're in a good place, then it's easier for us to be empathic. Then it's easier for us to do, you want to do all the chesed in the world then. You want to save the whales and save the whales in LA. You want to do anything possible. Because when we're in a good place, we're so much more motivated. The question is how to be aware of that and to know that even when we're not in a good place, we still have the mitzvot to direct us to be good people.
Every morning we say a selection from the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud, and one of them is the things that we get the reward for in this world, but the capital remains for us to enjoy in the world to come, are going to be Lut Chesed. It's, in a sense, empathizing with other people, not just in our hearts, but behaviorally. And I think a very important aspect of Judaism is we say, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You have a mandate to love your fellow Jew as you love yourself. So the rabbis ask the question, how can you force me to love somebody else? How can you force me, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, even to love God? It's defined very behaviorally. And so very often, psychology picked this up only 3,000 years later, that your feelings follow your actions. So even if a person doesn't feel empathy for somebody else, by going through the right motions, in a sense, you fake it till you make it. So I don't really feel like going to pay that Shiva call. But you go and you say, wow, I learned so many amazing things about this man he was my neighbor. I never even knew that he was doing such incredible things. Or you find that there's somebody that's a poor bride and you help her to make a wedding and you feel so good about yourself that after a while you really do start to empathize with other people and it takes on a life of its own that doesn't have to be artificially supported.
I think that's a really good point. Dr. Aiken has brought many of her wonderful books along with her. And I know that they're here. And they're for sale. And Dr. Aiken's available to speak. I wanted to know if there's any closing thought that you want to leave us with.
I just wanted to say that we often talk about people we treat, but I think that God handpicks the people that I treat because I have to learn things and I have to change myself. So I just want to share a story that to me is pretty incredible, and it's just one of many. I was working in a clinic at the time, and I had some free hours in my roster, and this woman who was clearly pretty disturbed came in to see me. And at the end of the session, she said to me, I know you're religious, and you're the only therapist who will understand my religiosity. And there's nobody else here I will work with. Okay, now my last name is Aiken, which is an Irish name. I went to Loyola University, which is a Catholic school, and I was working at Lenox Hill Hospital, which is a WASPy hospital. How in the world did this woman know that I was religious? That was number one. Okay, so I started to work with her. And I had a dilemma about whether or not to leave the hospital. If I left the hospital, I could write more books, I could, do more private practice perhaps, or maybe I would not have a private practice and things would fall apart. So this woman comes in one day and she says to me, I want you to cancel my appointments going forward until future notice because it's November. In November, New York is very cold and I don't have money for a winter coat. So until I can buy myself a coat, I can't afford the $15 copay for the clinic. I have to tell you, I was very happy to do that because she was a very annoying patient. By the end of the session, she says to me, you know what? God always takes care of me. Give me my session, he'll work it out. Next session, she comes in wearing a gorgeous fur coat. My jaw almost dropped. She starts the session by saying, I bet you're wondering where I got this coat from, right? Now, I didn't dare say a word to her because she would be very angry if I would open my mouth. I just kind of sat there and listened. So she tells me that after our last session, she went to the church across the street and she was about to pray, and the priest came over to her and said, Mary, a rich lady came in last night. She had 3 extra fur coats, and she brought them here and asked if there's anybody I knew who could use one. can you use a fur coat? So she said to me, see, I told you God always provides. He doesn't always give you what you want, but he always gives you what you need. Okay, so I'm a little bit dense. I don't change as quickly as some of my patients. I was still struggling back and forth. Should I leave? Should I stay? What's going to happen to my private practice? Will I have enough to support myself if I give up my hospital job? A month later, she comes in and she says, Dr. Aiken, I want you to cancel my next appointments until further notice, because the way I take care of myself every year is I buy myself Christmas presents. Because nobody else buys me presents. I buy them for myself. That's how I take care of me. Okay, very happy. I cancel a few patients. I cancel a few sessions. The other session, she says, you know what, Dr. Aiken, Doc always takes care of me. I'm sure he'll figure out a way to take care of me here too. Give me my session next week. She comes to the next session. She says, you'll never believe what happened. I left her office. I went home. I went to my mailbox, and there was an envelope in my mailbox from my mother. My mother hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. I open up the envelope. There's a letter from my mother with a check inside for $100. It says, Merry Christmas, Mary. She said, see, I told you God always takes care of me. He always gives you what you need, but he doesn't necessarily give you what you want. So God would always send me these patients that would tell me what I needed to hear as my Rebbe about all these spiritual things that I needed to work on in myself. And I just want to say that as much as I hope I've helped other people have given me so much, and inspiration, and appreciating resilience, appreciating the goodness of the human spirit, the ability of a person to persevere. I mean, I have a whole list of things that I could tell you that I don't think that therapy is just about what we do to or for others, but also very much what other people do to and for us. So that's an idea that I'd like to leave everybody with tonight.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Aiken.
Thank you everyone so much for being here. We really appreciate everyone's coming and enjoying, and we are just so grateful for you for this incredible talk. And again, we hear that you gained a lot, but really all of us have gained a tremendous amount. Dr. Aiken will be here in the corner if you'd like to purchase one of her books. Our speakers are here to schmooze with them if you have personal questions for the next 2 minutes. You'll see on your seats our next Modern Lines coming up in November, and wish everybody a Erev Tov.
How do you figure it out? How do you figure it out? Okay, let's go. Hi. So how do you like it?